Now, the southern Ukrainian city of Mariupol has been left in ruins after being subjected to fierce Russian bombardment early in the invasion. The city was besieged by Russian forces, and Ukrainian officials now estimate at least 25,000 people were killed there. Our correspondent Hilary Anderson has been speaking to survivors from the city for BBC Panorama. They give vivid and distressing testimony and a warning that Hilary's report contains references to suicide, and you may find some of it upsetting.
Artem has seen what no child should. He was in Mariupol's theatre when it was bombed. His 2-year-old sister, Nastya, had to be dug out of the rubble.
И Настя молчала. Молчала, просто молчала. А Настя такая сказала: мама, а еще, там мы переступали трупы.
How do you grasp horror when you're 6? Mariupol, once a golden city, was left devastated after a massive bombardment. All spring, the city was besieged, cut off from the world. We've spent 6 months speaking to people who lived through it. Entire blocks of flats were turned into infernos. Around 90% of the buildings destroyed in Mariupol were homes. Ukrainian officials estimate 5,000 to 7,000 people were crushed beneath the rubble. Olga was an accountant before the war, married to Valery. She loved to dance. One night in March, she was sleeping in her cellar. Valery and her parents were upstairs when their house was hit.
Сквозь это все голос мужа. Оля, помоги мне. Откопай меня. У меня ноги наполовину были засыпаны, я не могла даже двигаться. Через какое-то время я услышала его сдавленный хрип, и все, и он замолчал.
As it got light, Olga was still trapped and alone.
Жить мне не хотелось на тот момент. Вот. И чтобы ускорить процесс, я нашла острый камень и сделала вот это. Я потеряла много крови, но прошло какое-то время, и я увидела, что кровь свернулась. И в этот момент я подумала о том, что, наверное, если даже и это не дало мне уйти, то, наверное, для чего-то я здесь нужна еще.
Finally, after 8 hours under the rubble of her house, she was pulled out by a cable attached to her leg. Olga was the only survivor of that night. For more than 2 months, each day brought terror. For women, for children, even pregnant mothers. This was Mariupol's maternity hospital. And this photo, one of the most disturbing images of the war. Her name was Irina. She was a local clothes shop manager, due to give birth in 3 days' time. Oksana, at a nearby hospital, tried to save her life.
Когда уже извлекли ребенка, ребенок был без признаков жизни. Ничего страшнее в своей жизни не видела. Это просто как мы запаковывали в черный мешок женщину молодую с ее ребеночком. Вот так вот ей под грудь положили.
More people were killed here than in any other European city since World War II. These are their graves. Artem lost his granny.
Когда умерла моя бабушка,
Да.
я всегда сидела на окне, смотрела на облака. Ну, она выгинет голову свою. Значит, надо купить самолет где можно открыть стекло и потрогать на ощупь.
Потрогать бабушку?
Ну да, на ощупь.
Ты думаешь, это возможно?
Возможно.
Hilary Anderson, BBC News.
Well, Hilary joins us now live. And Hilary, I mean, it's absolutely gut-wrenching listening to those stories from Mariupol, because it very much symbolises the beginning of that conflict, the horror that we saw day and night coming out of Mariupol.
Yes, I mean, it's harrowing stories from start to finish when you spend 6 months, as my team has, listening to what people went through in Mariupol. The people who got out have been able to tell us in detail, harrowing detail, what it was actually like to be under these buildings when they came down on top of people, when they turned into infernos, what it feels like to lose your family members, what it feels like to go through immense emotional trauma whilst you're trying to recover from sometimes very serious injuries. This is a glimpse into what so many people went through.
We're looking at images, those drone images of Mariupol today. I mean, it is absolutely devastated. There isn't really a building that looks like it's standing. It's all just crumbled.
Yes, I mean, the estimates are that 90% of the buildings that were destroyed were residential. So they were homes and they were apartment blocks. There were buildings standing, so you can't say it was 100% decimation or flattening. But if you're someone who came from Mariupol, there's not much left of that city. Your shops, your banks, your homes. It's horrific, and I understand that the situation for people there now, because the people we've been talking to are still in touch with relatives and friends inside Mariupol, that it's still very difficult, that a lot of people are facing winter without windows or doors, and many of the people left behind in Mariupol were old people for whom it was too difficult to escape in the middle of the fighting this spring.
Yeah, and I remember being in Ukraine in those early days of the war, and we were hearing reports coming out of Mariupol. There was no water, there was no food. We were hearing about dead bodies piled up in the streets, people out of desperation not knowing where they were going to get their next meal, and on top of that dealing with the bombardment. And just tell us a little bit more about those who remain still stuck there today. Do they have access to these basic amenities now? How are they living?
Well, it's hard to get good information out of Mariupol now because obviously it's under Russian control. But of course, we've been trying, and we do have some information. It's hard to get jobs. It's hard to have money. There is food in the city now, but a lot of people can't afford much. There were big problems with the water still because the water pipes were so heavily bombed. People are stressed. There's definitely fear. People are scared to speak publicly, speak to Western journalists about what's happening, about the mass burials that we've been finding out about. It's extremely difficult in Mariupol. There are efforts, it seems, to rebuild, but you can see from the images the scale of that job.
Yeah, indeed. And as you say, because it's under Russian control at the moment, I can't imagine that will be very easy to do at this stage. Are people still trying to leave the city? Are they free to get out?
I have heard stories of people getting out over the late summer. A lot of people have gone to Russia because that's obviously one way to get to places that aren't as devastated as Mariupol. But many people who stayed are just still there. There were old people, like I said, who physically couldn't get out. I've also heard a lot of stories about old people who just said, I'm not leaving, I'm staying. And many of those people died. And some of them are still there.
Yeah, devastating situation there in Mariupol. Hilary, thank you so much for all of your reporting and coverage there.